Hi, guys. Good evening. Welcome back once again to the EdWord. I'm your host, Eddie. I apologize for this episode review video for AMC's The Walking Dead coming up a day later after the show premiered. I was busy last night. I was not able to watch it until earlier today, and wowza, did I really like it. I mean, I really liked it. Now, before I go on, of course, and I start rambling, as usual with all of my recap and review videos, if you are not caught up on The Walking Dead, especially this season in general, or at least this episode or last couple episodes, do not continue watching or listening to this video as I will be going into big spoilers. So that being said, you have been warned. Well, shut my mouth. He's alive. The fan theories proved to be true. Glenn is indeed alive. Last we saw him presumably being devoured alive by walkers after his buddy Nicholas shot himself in the head and thus taking both of them down into a sea of walkers. And at first it looked like Glenn was being ripped apart by walkers, but the way it was shot and the way the camera was angled, it wasn't people weren't entirely convinced that was the case. I myself, however, was convinced that it was indeed Glenn who was being ripped apart and that he was being eaten alive, and that's how he died in the show. And I was like, wow, talk about a horrific death scene. I mean, if you guys watched my episode review video for that episode, you'll see what I mean. You know, I was pretty, woo, holy God. But in this episode, what was great is that the opening scene was basically a flashback to when it happened. What had happened was that as some of the fan theories speculated on, and of course this proved to be accurate, Nicholas's body landed on top of Glenn with his body covering Glenn, and Glenn was just screaming in horror as the walkers dug into poor Nicholas's corpse and began feasting on him. Thus, this gave Glenn the chance to pull himself underneath the dumpster from which he fell off. And he squeezed himself under the dumpster and initially struggled with a few walkers that were grabbing at him, but he was able to kill him, to dispatch him, and they just continued to consume poor Nicholas's body. And then later, as it turns out, it looks like somebody is attempting to distract the walkers feasting on Nicholas, and a can rolls out and it starts to attract a few walkers. Before we know it, the herd is gone, disappeared from the alley. Somebody saved Glenn's life, and Glenn carefully makes his way out from underneath the dumpster. He's perfectly fine, not a cut or a scratch or a bite on him. He is alive and well. And son of a bitch, who should he encounter but the very person who saved his life and also eluding him for some reason? Enid, the weird girl who escaped Alexandria after the wolves attacked a few episodes ago. So she ends up saving his life, and then she tries to ditch him. And he tries to convince her to return to Alexandria with him, even though she's made it pretty clear to him that the community was attacked by humans and a lot of people died. And she said that's what always happens. Glenn, however, is determined to return to Alexandria to get back to his friends and his pregnant wife, of course. Meanwhile, in Alexandria, the group is still trying to figure out what the hell are they going to do with this massive herd that continues to pile up outside their walls? How are Daryl, Sasha, and Abraham, and presumably Glenn, since they're all acting under the assumption he's alive, at least Maggie is, how are they all going to get back in? And what was so great about this episode is that, yeah, we got confirmation Glenn is alive, which is great. It's just that it feels like to me this episode could really split fans down the middle, because I think some fans are going to be ecstatic, happy to see that Glenn is indeed alive and he did not die, as we were all misled to believe in earlier in the season, and that he is alive and well. And some people are going to be like, oh, come on, really? Really? He survived that? He survived being swarmed by hundreds of walkers? You know, a guy was being eaten on top of him and he survived that? How is that possible? I mean, I talked to a friend of mine earlier today who said he was going to quit watching The Walking Dead because he was so upset with the fact that Glenn indeed survived. Uh, survived this ordeal. Now, then again, my buddy is the guy who openly admits is always rooting for the zombies on the show because he may not care for the characters that much. At least he likes Daryl. But no, he told me that he wasn't interested in watching the show anymore because of this particular episode. And I was like, oh well, that's too bad. I hope you change your mind about it or something, but maybe not. Some people, like I suggested earlier, some people may be polarized by this episode. People are either going to be happy Glenn is alive, or people like my friend will not be happy he's alive. People question the reality of that situation. Could you realistically escape from walkers in that situation? Because as the fan theories and speculation was beginning to develop, people were already speculating, well, he slid under the dumpster. As simple as that. The guy's body fell on top of him, and as the walkers were eating Nicholas's body, Glenn slid under the dumpster. But the way that it was shot, the way the cameras were angled, it led us all with a bunch of questions like, is he alive or dead? And that's been the biggest question on everybody's mind since that episode. What happened to Glenn? Is he alive or is he dead? We just need a confirmation of fate. We just need to know. Did he return as a walker? Did he survive? Or are they going to find his eaten remains when they go out looking for him? A theory I was working on is that Maggie and Rick and a few others go out to search for Glenn, and that's when they find him reanimated, his half-eaten remains reanimated, and Maggie tearfully puts him down, or somebody puts him down, but most likely it would have been Maggie, to make it just more of a tragedy. And but no, unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Glenn is alive, and he needed to make it back to Alexandria just in time to see the crippling watchtower come crashing down on the walls, because it was the tower where the truck had impacted the wall during the wolf attack earlier this season when they attacked Alexandria. And Rick and Tobin and a few others are trying to reinforce the walls while also trying to think of a way to get the walkers away from Alexandria. Spencer heroically but stupidly try to shoot a grappling hook on the other side of the wall to try to crawl across. However, his line snapped, but fortunately, Rick, Tobin, and Morgan saved him by pulling him up, and Tara also provided covering fire by shooting walkers that got too close to Spencer when he fell. And Rick kind of belittles her for sticking her neck out for an Alexandrian. Like, Rick's patience with Alexandria is like getting up to here. He's really getting sick of it. And it was interesting to see him, turn so cold on some of these people. But one thing that did bother me about this episode, I mean, I was as happy as anyone to see that Glenn had survived, because there was a part of me, basically all I wanted was a confirmation of fate. I just wanted to know if he was alive or not. I wanted to know if he was eaten and they find his eaten remains, so he's dead, or if he was killed and turned into a walker, a half-eaten walker, or a walker that was wandering around or something like that. I just wanted a confirmation of fate, and I was very satisfied with the confirmation that we received. Fortunately, he's alive. However, does this mean he is going to meet his end the way he meets it in the comics? This is potential spoiler material from the comics for those of you who don't read the comics, but most of you are probably familiar with this, as there have been hundreds of videos online discussing this very theory. In the comics, Glenn is beaten to death with a barbed wire baseball bat at the hands of an evil, nasty man named Negan, who is the leader of a group of hostile survivors called the Saviors. And to make an example of his power and his strength, he beats Glenn to death in front of Rick, Heath, Maggie, and Carl, and a few others, I believe. And a lot of people are saying this is how Glenn is going to die in the TV show, or should have died in the TV show. However, this still could happen, but I think the producers and the writers of the show know that the fans are expecting it to go down that way. I still think they're leaving that fate in the TV show to another character. I think we're going to see either Daryl or Morgan, and I hate to say this, but I would honestly prefer Morgan over Daryl. I mean, I love Morgan, but Daryl's just been around longer. He's a bigger fan favorite. However, if they really wanted to make it truly heartbreaking and devastating to fans, they would probably do it to Daryl. I'm sure that's being discussed right now. In fact, that may be a storyline for the season 6 finale, if not for the season 7 premiere. As to when Negan will appear or not, it's hard to say. But, we'll see. I still think it's a possibility that Glenn could certainly very well meet his end on the TV show the way he meets in the comics. However, to keep things interesting and kind of fresh and new on the TV show, I think another character may meet that fate that Glenn meets in the comics. What else was interesting about this episode is a conflict of ideologies, a conflict of interest. Rick and Michonne were struggling to tell Morgan that his philosophy of all life is precious isn't exactly going to fly in the apocalypse. Now, Morgan has very good reasons for holding very dear to this ideology, this philosophy that all life is precious, and he refuses to kill people. However, conflicts with somebody like Carol, who is eliminate any and all threats in order to keep herself and her loved ones alive. And, Morgan is just not that kind of person. But he has an interesting point, like he explains to Rick and Michonne. It's that ideology that brought me back from the darkness, that transformed me and made me rediscover and get back in touch with my humanity again. It's what saved me. Sure, I've thought about letting it go at some times and just scrapping the whole idea of all life is precious, but I believe all life is indeed precious, and that's what I need to keep myself going. But Rick and Michonne are kind of telling him, yeah, that's not exactly going to fly. That kind of attitude or opinion or choice of lifestyle may not keep you alive much longer in the apocalypse. And this whole episode, Morgan is secretly trying to obtain medical supplies to tend to the wound on the injured wolf captive that he's secretly holding as a prisoner in the holding cell that nobody else seems to know about until he's kind of forced to reveal to Denise, the doctor or the medical student who had to step in and take over for Reg after Rick shot him. He had to include her, even though he was reluctant to. He had to include her and say that he needed antibiotics, not for himself, but for someone else. Unfortunately, ever-watchful Carol noticed where these two were sneaking off somewhere. She follows them, and right as she opens the door, she bumps into Morgan. She's like, "Who the hell do you have in there?" And, they kind of have a brief stare down between the two of them, and that's the last we see of them in the episode. And another thing that the one thing that did bother me about this episode, I liked it overall, but the one thing that did bother me is how could Rick and Carl, especially Rick, possibly think it is a good idea to teach the son of a man he murdered, practically, or killed, teach him how to fire a gun. Ron claims he wants to learn to shoot a gun so he can keep Alexandria safe, so he can kill walkers. And Rick and Carl are willing participants to teach him and educate him. But why do they think it is a good idea? Because this kid has clearly expressed his dislike for Carl, his dislike for Rick, and, he blames Carl for, kind of stealing Enid away from him, even though she left willingly on her own after the wolf attack on Alexandria. Carl really had nothing to do with that. Ron's just looking for someone to blame. So, she left, Enid left, and, Ron had really no one else to blame but Carl. What I'm worried about is that final scene towards the end of the episode, we see Ron approaching Carl with the intent that he's going to shoot him. But right before that can happen, sure enough, and it's such a tragedy too, because before the watchtower finally collapses over the fence, allowing this enormous breach in the walls of Alexandria for all of the hundreds, if not close to 1,000 walkers to start pouring in. They see a bunch of balloons, like a flock of balloons being released from afar. These green balloons that Enid and Glenn had recovered earlier in the episode, and these two are constantly back and forth with each other saying, Enid's practically given up on living, where Glenn has refused to give up living and insists on living in the world. And Maggie was telling Rick earlier in the episode about if Glenn was alive, he'd give off some kind of signal, and that is exactly how she interprets the balloons flying high in the sky. A signal from Glenn that he is alive and well and on his way back to Alexandria. Unfortunately, right after that brief moment of happiness, the watchtower collapses, and that is the last shot of the episode. So we basically have a lot of problems that are collapsing in on themselves, literally and metaphorically. Carol and Morgan are now going to be at odds with each other about how to survive in this world. And the fact that Morgan's been hiding from everybody, he took one of the wolves captive after the attack. Rick and Carl are teaching Ron how to shoot. Ron is either going to shoot Carl because he blames Carl for Enid leaving, or he's going to shoot Carl in an effort to hurt Rick. He's like, you killed my father, I'm going to kill your son. And before he has a chance to do that, that's when the watchtower collapses down, and then all hell will break loose. Glenn and Enid are still en route to Alexandria. Whether or not they'll make it there in time to see their friends are safely out of the community or not remains to be seen. Daryl, Sasha, and Abraham are still en route, as far as we know, to Alexandria. Will they get there in time to have the survivors hop aboard their new truck and they all book it and get the hell out of there or not? So it's like all of these problems are all going to be colliding with each other in the mid-season finale, which airs next Sunday on AMC. It sounds like it's going to be a doozy, guys. I was watching Talking Dead, and Chris Hardwick says he's seen it, and he really liked it. He said it was amazing. I just have a bad feeling we might lose a main character. Now that's been confirmed, Glenn is indeed alive and survived his near-death experience. We still haven't technically lost a main character yet, so who could we lose and how? Leave your thoughts and opinions and your feedback down below. What are your theories as to who could die in the mid-season finale, how and why? Do you think it could be Carol? Do you think she and Morgan get into a bit of a struggle? They accidentally let the wolf out and he kills Carol, or he kills somebody else? Do you think it could be Carl? Could he get shot, or could he at least get shot in the eye and just sustain a horrible injury? You know, please leave your thoughts and opinions down below. Let's try to keep the comment section spoiler free, especially regarding the comic book series. Thanks for watching, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Walking Dead as much as I did. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel for more Walking Dead content and related videos. And thanks again for tuning in here on the EdWord for all of your episode review and recap needs. What did you guys like about tonight's episode? What are you looking forward to for the rest of this season? Do you think we're going to lose anybody else? Or what are your thoughts on the fake out regarding Glenn's death and then his sudden return? Please leave your thoughts and opinions down below. I'd love to hear from everybody. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great rest of the night. And of course, until next time, may the Force be with you.